After the success of their third Frankenstein film, Universal thought, why not keep doing this forever? And Ghost of Frankenstein was born. The production had some minor complications, like the budget being slashed, the stars of Son having better stuff to do, and Hitler, but it was well received upon its release, and now it's seen as a decent-ish B-movie. What did I think of it? Well, when starting this project I thought the series had a slow decline, hence the title. But after a few rewatches, I'm pretty confident in calling it not only the worst Frankenstein movie, but the worst Universal monster movie. And if you'll let me, I'd like to explain why. What do the Universal monster flicks have in common? A few things come to mind, but the first will be their presentation. Almost every film has gorgeous sets and makeup, accentuated with harsh shadows to make a distinct, gloomy atmosphere. But Ghost of Frankenstein doesn't. It mostly takes place in a more modern environment, which works for the first 5 minutes we're here as Igor and the monsters stick out, showing they're not in their element. But it doesn't get much darker as it goes on. The film was directed by Erle C. Kenton, and of his work I've seen, this is probably his best looking, although that isn't a very high bar. There's quite a few memorable shots, and I like how the monster often dominates the frame, but overall the camera work isn't that impressive and can't save the bland setting. However, as much as I adore the visuals of the previous films, what's most important is the story, so how does that hold up? The opening scene starts out promising, as if you ignore how this thing is still alive, it works as a natural continuation of Son. Not just by bringing back old characters, some more literally than others, but by having the inciting incident be a consequence of the events in the previous film. You know how I complained about the villagers forgiving the Frankensteins too easily in Son? Well, Ghost does some much appreciated damage control, and shows that while they may have forgiven them for what they didn't forget. And because they're a superstitious folk, they blame them for a string of bad luck, leading to an angry mob destroying the castle and setting the monster free. There are a few minor problems like the castle changing, and unfortunately Inspector Crow doesn't make a return, as his actor plays a different character, but they don't affect the story, and the first 5 minutes is a really nice bridge between the films. The rest of the runtime is pretty disconnected, taking place in a new town with a new Frankenstein household, but that's fine. Wolf's story is over, and part of what made Igor so much of a threat in Son was his knowledge of the castle and its secret passages, so forcing him to overcome the challenge of traversing an alien environment, whilst keeping a 6'9", 284-pound baby under control, could be interesting. When all's said and done, I'd say the continuity is pretty strong. Unfortunately, that does have a few drawbacks, as it means inheriting some decisions made in Son that I really don't care for. 1. The monster is even dumber. 2. It doubles down on the supernatural aspects. And 3. Having the Ghost of Frankenstein say this.
I gave it a criminal brain.
These each vary in severity, but are all part of a larger issue, that Ghost of Frankenstein doesn't understand what made the previous movies good. And I don't just mean the first two. Even Son gets a raw deal, which I'll get to when I talk about the characters. Right now, I want to talk about the theme, or lack thereof. The first two films are a cautionary tale on the dangers of scientific progress, so naturally there was no magic, as adding it could risk muddling up the theme. Bride got pretty out there at times, but it was still explicitly science. Now, just because you have magic doesn't mean you can't have this theme, and even if it did, this isn't inherently bad. Son strayed away from it and replaced it with other ideas. However, when you stray away from those themes and don't offer anything nearly as substantive to fill its place, that's when problems tend to arise. Of course, even that isn't an automatic death sentence. Just because your ideas aren't particularly challenging doesn't mean they can't be executed well through a tight plot, strong direction, and compelling characters. Speaking of which, let's start out on an almost positive note. The film's protagonist, Ludwig Frankenstein, is probably the best example of the film trying something new instead of retreading old ground. Henry and Wolf were both pretty resilient when their backs were against the wall, and when the time came for action they were ready to step up. But Ludwig is a straight up badass from the get-go. He knows who and what he's dealing with, and won't let them push him around. The movie can go a bit too far with this, like when he meets the monster and it does this, and he just stands there, like, dude, run away, or at least walk backwards at a moderate pace, he's going to kill you. But most of the time it works really well, and even here, silly as it is, it clearly showcases his bravery so the audience knows they aren't dealing with the average Frankenstein anymore. Don't get me wrong, Ludwig's just as scared of the monster as everyone else, but he doesn't let it get in his way. Whenever he meets it or Igor face to face, he keeps his cool and controls the situation. But as cool as it is to watch cool people do cool things, he's actually a pretty boring character. He has a kind of arc, starting out wanting to keep the monster a secret, even from his own daughter, worried that the knowledge of it would destroy his life like it had with his brother and father. Later the monster breaks into his house, because it's unwell and wants him to fix it. But Ludwig manages to capture it, and here, Ludwig has the chance to dismember and destroy the creature once and for all, which is what he intends to do, but changes his mind and instead plans to use it for the betterment of humanity, by switching the monster's brain out with that of a scientist the monster killed. But he doesn't come to this conclusion on his own due to his personality, experiences or convictions, nor after having his belief challenged by the character who's against killing the monster, No, his father's ghost randomly comes to him, tells him what to do, and then he does it. Wolf had a similar scene in Son where Igor convinced him to bring the monster to life again. However, Igor isn't someone Wolf will listen to with minimal pushback. In fact, the scene starts with Igor trying to kill Wolf, and Wolf aiming a gun at him. Igor needs to use emotive language to manipulate him.
Your father made him, and Heinrich Frankenstein was your father too.
You mean to imply then that that is my brother?
And Wolf doesn't just blindly go along with everything Igor says. When he agrees, he pushes back against one of Igor's demands, and convinces him of something. This conflict doesn't just make Son's scene more dynamic than Ghost's, it gives the characters an opportunity to play off each other, which establishes Igor's character and lays the groundwork for the two's relationship. Meanwhile, Ludwig's scene just highlights how shallow he is. His father's ghost comes to him, and all they talk about is the monster. Ludwig never asks how he's here or small unimportant questions like what happens after death, and when he leaves, neither say I love you or even goodbye. His father just leaves and Ludwig gets back to work. His father's never even brought up again. There's no reason Ludwig couldn't have come to this conclusion by himself. The only reasons for there to be a ghost are A, the screenwriter had the gift of prophecy and wanted to annoy me specifically with a certain line we'll get back to later, or not, it might be cut out, or B, they really wanted to call it the Ghost of Frankenstein. And since there was already a perfectly good title available,
The curse of Frankenstein.
I'm going to go with A. All in all, Ludwig's not a good character, but he was a good idea for a character. Next up, let's talk about Igor. Going back to his and Wolf's first meeting in Son, tell me, what do we learn about him? He's aggressive, controlling, and manipulative. These traits are consistent throughout the whole film, or maybe a better word to use would be constant, because he's always angry at the world and taking steps to get his revenge on it. When you combine that with his intimate knowledge of Castle Frankenstein and control over a powerful monster, he's one hell of an intimidating character. Even before he's formally introduced, he exudes a creepy aura, scaring children with just a look in the opening scene. Ghost decided to take the character in a different direction, never letting him have the upper hand, and making him more submissive and meek. Halfway through the film, he and the monster are knocked out and imprisoned by Ludwig. Except not really, because Igor's just taken to an unlocked bedroom, and as soon as he wakes up, Ludwig lets him into his lab and says they might need his help. This is only their second time talking to each other, with the first being when Igor tried to blackmail Ludwig, and in that conversation it was implied that Ludwig knows who Igor is, yet here he still treats him so casually. I wouldn't say Igor's actions are inconsistent with his previous characterization, as he's quite like how he was in Son at the start. Then as the story progresses and his situation gets worse and worse, he degrades, which makes sense given the situation, but it doesn't make for a threatening villain, which begs the question what the film was trying to accomplish with his character. In the beginning, his goal was to help the monster recover from its sulfur bath, because he sees the creature as a friend, his only friend at that, which wasn't how I read their relationship in Son, but the pieces were there, so whatever. From this, I think the film wants you to root for him, but their friendship is pretty one-sided, with the brick wall barely acknowledging him half the time, so I'm not invested in their relationship, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the film wants you to pity Igor. After all, he's disfigured, his house was blown up, his dog won't speak to him, and he's also a murderous little goblin who makes women uncomfortable with his mere presence and plots to take over the world the second he gets power. Speaking of, is this a good time to bring up how he's kind of stupid? I have no idea what they were going for most of the runtime, but in the climax, he is very clearly supposed to be a threat. His brain is placed inside the monster's body, and he plans to use his incredible strength to take over the country, which sounds cool and all, but how? The monster's tough, but it's not indestructible. It can still be pierced with bullets, so one soldier with a machine gun could shred it to pieces. And that's not accounting for how slow it is. Even if it was this strong, which it's not, just walk away at a moderate pace and boom, you've escaped. What a threatening villain. All in all, Igor's not a good idea for character, but he has multiple good ideas for a character crammed together and executed poorly. Alright, I went on about those two for a while, so let's just shotgun through the lesser characters. Dr. Boehmer is a pretty interesting character, I just wish he was a bit more fleshed out. It's kind of weird how he's against killing the monster because that would be murder, but is more than happy to help take over the country and gas a mob of people. These aren't completely mutually exclusive, as Boehmer is established to be bitter about not getting the recognition he thinks he deserves, so I can accept him for going morality to finally get it. But given the severity of what he's willing to do, I wish more time had been spent on it. Erle Frankenstein is a female character in the 1940s. Ralph was Elsa's boyfriend, and despite watching the full film 3 times, I had to look up what his name was. I then had to rewatch the scenes he's in to remember the name of his job, and discovered his name is actually Eric. So the characters and by extension their dynamics are extremely poor. Because of this, at best, I don't care about the plot, as I have no investment in the people driving it. And at worst, I'm annoyed at it because the characters are acting inconsistent to serve it. This is best exemplified by the ending. where everything set up throughout the film pays off. I love climaxes where it feels like the walls are closing in, and the more you think about how the protagonists are going to get out of this, the more you realise just how screwed they are. This is the opposite of that. The film tries to make you feel like the characters are boxed in by making Igor more powerful than ever. Apparently we've returned to the Middle Ages, as the villagers are besieging the Frankenstein family home, because for some reason they think the Frankensteins kidnapped a child. I mean, they did, but they don't know that. I've already pointed out why Igor's not as big a deal as the film thinks he is, but the villagers are arguably worse despite being more of a threat. My description of the mob's intrusion was paraphrasing a quote in Son, where Wolf points out how absurd it is for an angry mob to swarm their home, because it is ridiculous, and it would never happen in a modern place with less superstitious people. Ghost has it happen in a modern place with less superstitious people. And unlike in Son, where everyone has deep-rooted biases against the family, here they seem pretty well liked. Also, in Son, they never actually storm the castle. In both films, a police officer goes in first, and in Son, everyone waits outside and lets police do their thing, but in Ghost, they wait 2 minutes and then go in anyway. It's baffling how the guys that blew up a castle for just existing at the start of the film were more reasonable than these yahoos. Like with Boma's motivations, the pieces are all here, but the film just doesn't do much with them, which makes the events feel weightless. If the way characters get into trouble has such a weak cause and effect, then why should I expect the way they get out of them to be any different?
Boomer, I can't see.
This ending is actually really funny. Igor goes blind and he throws Boma into a thingamajig which electrocutes him for some reason, and then he knocks over a bunch of chemicals which explode and burn the house down, killing him and Ludwig.
I, Igor, will live forever.
Sure, bud. And then Ralph and Elsa walk into the horizon, and the movie's over. So if it wasn't clear, I didn't care for this film. But now I want to take a second and talk about something I did quite appreciate. It's only 67 minutes. Alright, now let's talk about the monster. It is everything I complained about in Son taken even further. The monster no longer grunts or growls, it is silent. The monster seldom emotes. It can barely open its eyes. And the monster is a hollow character. It does what the script needs it to, with the thinnest motivation. A minor improvement on Son is that the monster does have some agency, but that's nullified by everything else. Because what does a character's actions mean when they're driven by the plot, instead of the other way around? Its best moment in the film is when it arrives in the village. Whilst Igor's chatting with one of the locals, it just kind of wanders off, like a curious child in a new place. It comes across a little girl being bullied, which reminds him of his own mistreatment. So he scares the bullies off. What a cute little moment. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. The monster picks up the girl, don't know why, and goes to fetch the ball. And oh, wait, I know why. It's so that the villagers think it's kidnapping the girl, and because the monster can't speak, and the girl... there's no way to tell them what's really going on. The monster slaps and then kills someone as they try to stop them, and actually seeing this, the girl stays quiet and just gets her ball. Once that's done, the girl asks to be put back, and the monster complies. No fuss, only to be arrested, which is fair, but I can't imagine the monster would see it that way. Just like in the first movie, the townspeople's hatred of the monster was initially caused by a misunderstanding, except here they don't realise it's a monster. They think it's just a big crazy dude. So they lack the bias against the creature prevalent in the other movies. This change doesn't have any mechanical difference, but it's a good example of how watered down everything is. Another, more prominent example is a little girl. The second part of the scene was iffy, but the first was decent. Unfortunately, it lays the groundwork to bring the child back later. Igor tells the monster that its brain is going to be switched with his, so that the two of them will be together forever. But the monster doesn't want the brain of his closest friend who's guided, protected and stood by it. It wants the brain of a kid it knew for 2 minutes who indirectly got it beaten and arrested. Why? Because child. The monster was friends with a child in the first and third movie, which I guess made the writers think he just likes kids. But no. He was friends with the little girl in the first movie because at that point, she was the first person to show him kindness, and they were only friends for about a minute before he accidentally drowned her. Rip. Then in the third movie, he was friends with a boy, but that's because he was the only person possible to be friends with. And he only gives him his full attention after Igor dies, and he has no one else left. Meanwhile, his actual best friends are Igor and an old blind man, who are both adults. He's always had a connection with children due to his immaturity, but there's no reason that he should inherently value relationships with them over adults, especially his relationship with this child over this adult. But I guess despite his friendship with the monster being a core part of Igor's character in the film, until it's not, their relationship just doesn't matter. At the start of the film, when the monster's free, it doesn't look happy to be reunited with its dead friend, which, makes sense. It must have heard Igor play music to it, and its brain is messed up. But the film robs itself of an endearing scene that strengthens their bond and humanises the monster, or I guess a more accurate phrase would be manages to dodge, since the film clearly has no interest in that. To the film, the monster is no more important than Dr. Kettering. In my last video, I said the monster's death scenes were emblematic of how each movie approaches its character, and whilst I said it, I showed this. But this isn't the monster. It's Igor. The real monster's death scene doesn't exist. It had its brain removed off screen and we never see it again. I'm not against a story killing its characters unceremoniously, but what the hell is wrong with you? We've spent 4 movies following this character and seen the long-term impact they've had on the lives of so many people, and this is how its story ends. At least he died as he lived, having his thoughts, feelings, and personality disposed of so that the film could focus on how big, strong, and says grr he is. What a sick joke. How much you enjoy this film will depend on what you want to get out of it. If you want something intelligent with deep characters, this isn't the film for you. But if you want a fun B-picture, then it's still not for you. I would highly recommend The Mummy's Hand. It's like Indiana Jones if instead of being a genre-defining classic, it was just pretty good. This is such a worthless film. It does nothing and it does it poorly, which is why I'm glad I made this video. Before it was just a stain on a series I loved that sat my energy when I thought about it, but because of this video, I've thought of it every single day for the past 6 months. Hating an 82-year-old movie has become part of my lifestyle, and I'll always treasure it for that. But it's still terrible and probably the worst Universal monster movie. Its biggest competition is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, but I refuse to rewatch it. I'm done. In the future, I'd like to do a ranking video where I talk about all the films more briefly, but for right now, I'm done. Thank you so much for watching.